There is a quiet kind of intelligence that prefers the corner of the room, not the center. A wisdom that listens more than it speaks. That doesn't crave the laughter of the crowd or the buzzing chaos of conversation. It is the kind that walks alone, not because it cannot walk with others, but because it chooses silence over noise, depth over surface, solitude over spectacle. If you've ever found yourself feeling disconnected at a social gathering, not out of awkwardness, but because something in the interaction felt shallow or performative, you're not alone. And if you've ever been made to feel strange for preferring books to parties or thinking to talking, then you're already walking a path once tread by some of the most brilliant minds in history. This is not a video about antisocial behavior or misanthropy. It's about why many highly intelligent people, philosophers, scientists, artists, thinkers, have historically withdrawn from the social world, not out of contempt for it, but because their values and inner lives often demand something else entirely. The question is not why they reject others, but what they are embracing instead. We live in a time where social engagement is constant. Messages never stop arriving. Our screens become windows into endless rooms full of voices. Popularity is counted. Approval is liked. Connection is gamified. And in this climate, solitude can feel like a rebellion or a defect. But what if it's neither? What if solitude, when chosen, is the natural habitat of a certain kind of mind? To understand this deeply, we need to go back. Far back. Back to when Schopenhauer, a man whose life was marked by loneliness, introversion, and relentless contemplation, wrote with startling honesty about the nature of intelligent minds and their relationship to society. He wasn't alone. Before him, Stoic sages in ancient Greece, ascetics in India, and mystics in the Islamic Golden Age all touched on the same theme, that there exists a type of person for whom solitude is not absence, but presence, not emptiness, but clarity. Arthur Schopenhauer, known as one of the most pessimistic philosophers in Western history, also happened to be one of the most psychologically insightful. He suggested that the more intelligent a person is, the more they are likely to avoid unnecessary socialization, not because they dislike others, but because they experience life at a depth that makes surface-level interaction feel tiring, even pointless. His views, controversial and stark, raise difficult but important questions. What is the social world really offering us? What is it costing us? And why do some people, regardless of culture or age, keep drifting away from it? This video is not just about Schopenhauer, it is about the timeless tension between solitude and society, between depth and distraction, between the outer world's noise and the inner world's calling. So let's take a walk through history, psychology, and personal reflection. And let us try to understand. Why do some of the brightest minds seek the quietest lives? And what can that teach us, not about escaping life, but about living it more truly? To understand why some of the most intelligent people have distanced themselves from society, we need to begin by asking, what is society really? At its core, society is a web of relationships, a living, breathing network of shared language, roles, customs, and expectations. It thrives on interaction, cooperation, status, and conformity. From the earliest tribal groups to digital platforms today, it has always depended on cohesion. But this cohesion often comes at a cost. The individual must bend to the collective. Difference must be smoothed over. And solitude, that fertile ground for insight, is often seen as dangerous or, at best, unproductive. This tension is ancient. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Diogenes wandered the streets with a lamp, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He rejected society's values, lived in a barrel, and defied authority with biting wit. To some, he was mad. To others, deeply wise. What he rejected wasn't people. It was pretense. He believed most social interaction was built on masks, not truth. For him, walking alone was not a loss. It was liberation. Then came the Stoics: Zeno, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. These were not misanthropes, but they warned against getting too entangled in the opinions of others. Epictetus taught that freedom comes from within, not from approval. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by people, wrote his Meditations in Solitude, reminding himself that fame and chatter are fleeting. They knew something vital, that the crowd can often distract us from ourselves. In India, the Upanishadic sages retreated into forests to seek ultimate reality. Their idea of knowledge was not information, it was realization. This demanded silence, self-discipline, and introspection. The social world was not condemned outright, but seen as noisy, impermanent, and often misleading. In Buddhist philosophy, too, detachment from social craving is seen as essential to liberation. In Islamic history, figures like Al-Ghazali and later Sufi mystics echoed this sentiment. Al-Ghazali, after years of teaching and fame, withdrew from his position at the prestigious Nizamiya University and went into spiritual retreat. His crisis was not intellectual, it was existential. He felt that social status, recognition, and worldly knowledge had not brought him closer to truth. Like so many before him, he turned away from the world to rediscover what was real within. Schopenhauer enters this lineage like a cold wind. He did not sugarcoat his view of the world. He believed most human beings were governed by blind will, desires they could barely understand or control. Social interaction, he argued, was often driven by vanity, ego, and distraction. He famously said that solitude is the fate of all great minds, not because they are above others, but because their standards for truth, depth, and authenticity are rarely met in everyday conversation. It is easy to dismiss this as arrogance, but Schopenhauer wasn't boasting. He suffered deeply from loneliness, depression, and estrangement. His writings are filled with melancholy and raw insight. He did not celebrate solitude as a constant joy, but as a necessary environment for thought, creativity, and self-possession. For him, the pain of isolation was more bearable than the emptiness of shallow connection. Fast forward to modern times, and the pattern continues. Nikola Tesla, one of the most brilliant inventors of the modern age, lived a largely solitary life. He once said he didn't think you could be truly inventive without the periods of isolation. Emily Dickinson rarely left her home in later life. Franz Kafka lived with constant tension between his need to write and the demands of the social world. Virginia Woolf spoke of a room of one's own, necessary not just for women writers, but for any thinker who wishes to create without interruption. What all these minds shared was not misanthropy, but sensitivity, a kind of mental and emotional depth that made ordinary socialization feel like noise interrupting a deeper signal. They did not hate people. They simply experienced life through a different filter, one that required space, quiet, and distance to process fully. But society is not built to honor that, especially in our time. Today's social world is built around visibility, interaction, and constant engagement. If you are not networking, you are falling behind. If you are not updating, you are disappearing. If you are not liked, you are irrelevant. The modern world punishes quietness, not overtly, but through invisibility. And yet, even now, some people instinctively step away, not because they have failed to fit in, but because they have succeeded in realizing something else. There is a paradox here. Smart people, especially those with introspective intelligence, often crave meaning over stimulation, truth over comfort, and depth over popularity. But these values are rarely rewarded in the social marketplace. So they retreat, sometimes gracefully, sometimes painfully, but always with a purpose: to protect the inner life. It is important to note that intelligence here does not simply mean high IQ. It means a kind of existential intelligence, a drive to understand not just facts, but meaning, to ask why, not just how, to notice what lies beneath the surface of things. This kind of intelligence often comes with sensitivity, not weakness, but an attunement to emotional texture, to unspoken tensions, to the undercurrents of human behavior. For people like this, social situations can be overwhelming, even when they are not unpleasant. Too many layers, too much performance, too little honesty. The mind becomes tired not because it cannot engage, but because it cannot pretend. Schopenhauer believed that the more a person thinks, the more they realize how little most conversation has to do with truth. He did not despise others. He simply found that most people were not searching for the same things he was. And that is the core of it. People who care less about social life are often not rejecting connection. They are rejecting false connection. They are not above others. They are just looking for something else, something deeper, something real. This doesn't mean they are always right. Solitude can become escapism. Withdrawal can become fear. The line between wisdom and avoidance is thin. But the longing behind it is not a flaw. It is a signal, a need for authenticity, not applause. And it has always been with us. From the cave dwellers of ancient India to the forest-walking Stoics, from mystics and poets to philosophers and modern creators, there has always been a type of mind that turns inward, not to escape the world, but to better understand it. So, before we judge those who walk alone, maybe we should ask, what are they walking toward? There is a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from physical labor but from sustained inauthenticity. Social fatigue, the subtle exhaustion of shaping yourself to fit a room, a conversation, a performance. For some, it's manageable. For others, especially those with a deep inner life, it becomes a quiet crisis, and psychology is beginning to understand why. Modern psychology offers a range of insights into why intelligent, introspective individuals often withdraw from social life. One of the key concepts is overexcitability, a term developed by psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski. He argued that gifted or highly intelligent people often have intensified experiences in 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, imaginational, psychomotor, and sensual. In other words, they feel more, think more, imagine more, and react more intensely to stimulation, both external and internal. Social settings, filled with overlapping conversations, unspoken hierarchies, emotional undercurrents, and subtle expectations, can overwhelm such individuals, not because they're fragile, but because they're processing more. The brain is taking in every detail: the hesitation in someone's tone, the contradiction in their body language, the unspoken tension between others in the room. It's like having 10 browser tabs open while everyone else is browsing in peace. Another relevant concept is social energy variance, closely related to introversion. But introversion isn't just about liking quiet. It's about how one's energy is restored. Extroverts are energized by social interaction. Introverts are often drained by it, even when they enjoy it. Highly intelligent people, especially those with strong introspective or intuitive tendencies, tend to lean toward the introverted side, not out of shyness, but because solitude offers a kind of clarity they can't find elsewhere. In Jungian psychology, this ties into the archetype of the hermit, the wise one who steps outside of society not out of disdain, but out of a need to reconnect with deeper truths. The hermit is not a recluse in the negative sense, but a seeker, and often seekers must travel alone. There's also the issue of asynchronous development, where a person's intellectual maturity outpaces their emotional or social development, or the development of their peers. A child who's reading philosophy at 13 might struggle to relate to classmates obsessed with popularity or trends. As this person grows, they may continue to feel slightly out of sync with their social environment, always sensing a kind of misalignment between what matters to them and what seems to matter to everyone else. Another lens comes from existential psychology, particularly the work of Viktor Frankl and Rollo May. They explored the idea that true psychological health requires grappling with life's deeper questions: meaning, death, freedom, isolation. Many people avoid these questions through distraction, often social distraction. But those with high existential sensitivity can't look away. They feel the weight of these questions even in everyday life, and they often find typical social environments too preoccupied with surface-level concerns to feel satisfying. This leads to a kind of emotional loneliness, not due to the absence of people, but due to the absence of resonance. The modern world is noisy with communication, but thin on connection. There is more talk than ever before, but less shared depth. For someone with a reflective nature, this imbalance creates a psychological dissonance. They may be present, but feel absent, surrounded, but isolated. And so they begin to withdraw, not as a rejection, but as a re-centering. Contemporary research on high sensitivity, popularized by Dr. Elaine Aron, also sheds light here. Highly sensitive persons, HSPs, process sensory and emotional information more deeply. This includes subtle social cues, emotional nuance, and interpersonal conflict. While this trait brings strengths, empathy, intuition, creativity, it also makes social settings more taxing. HSPs often need solitude to recharge and integrate their experiences. Their nervous systems, in a sense, require it. Then there's theory of mind, the ability to understand what others are thinking or feeling. Highly intelligent people often possess an enhanced theory of mind, meaning they're constantly tracking the thoughts, motives, and emotional states of others. While this makes them socially perceptive, it also adds a layer of psychological load. It becomes hard to relax when your mind is always analyzing, interpreting, reading between the lines. We also need to consider the paradox of authenticity. Many intelligent individuals value honesty, self-consistency, and truth. But much of social interaction requires subtle performance, saying the polite thing instead of the honest one, smiling when bored, agreeing to avoid conflict. While these behaviors help society function, they can feel dishonest or tiring to someone wired for sincerity. Over time, this creates friction. Do I remain authentic, or do I adapt? Many choose withdrawal, not because they can't adapt, but because they won't abandon themselves. This is where modern science aligns with ancient wisdom. In Sufi philosophy, the idea of khalwa, or spiritual retreat, is central. The seeker withdraws from the world not to escape it, but to better see it. Silence is not absence. It is presence at a higher frequency. Similarly, Buddhist teachings speak of noble silence, where speech is withheld not out of fear, but out of reverence for the moment. These traditions understood what modern psychology is now proving, that solitude, when chosen and intentional, is not a void. It is a mirror. Carl Jung, who spent years studying both Western psychology and Eastern mysticism, believed that the individual must turn inward to truly individuate, to become whole. And this process cannot happen in the crowd. It requires solitude, reflection, and confrontation with the self. But there's a shadow side too. Withdrawal can turn into isolation. The desire for depth can turn into elitism. The search for truth can become an excuse to avoid vulnerability. That's why psychological maturity requires balance. Solitude must be a choice, not a cage. And depth must remain connected to compassion. There is a risk that highly intelligent individuals, especially those who feel misunderstood, may develop a subtle contempt for others. Schopenhauer himself was guilty of this at times, seeing most people as shallow or foolish. But wisdom, real wisdom, softens this tendency. It learns to see others not as distractions, but as different expressions of the same struggle. Not everyone is seeking truth in the same way, but most are seeking something: belonging, meaning, love. The task, then, is not to reject society wholesale, but to engage it from a centered place, to know when to step away and when to return. to value solitude, not as a permanent refuge but as a sacred space for renewal. So when we ask why smart people don't care about social life, perhaps we're asking the wrong question. It's not that they don't care. It's that they care differently. They care about truth, about meaning, about resonance. And when the social world cannot offer that, they quietly step back, not to disappear, but to realign. They are not avoiding life. They are listening for it beneath the noise. We've explored the psychology, the theories, the frameworks, the patterns that shape how intelligent people relate to the world. But theory is only half the truth. The other half lives in the lived experience, in the ache of disconnection, in the moments when silence speaks louder than words, in the quiet rooms where deep thinkers question if they were the only ones who feel this way. To understand this topic fully, we need to go beyond the clinical and into the emotional. This next section is not analysis, it's a meditation, a reflection on what it actually feels like to think deeply in a world that often moves too fast to notice. There is a kind of silence that is not chosen, but felt. It exists not in the absence of sound, but in the absence of resonance. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and felt lonelier than when you were alone, you already know what I mean. It is the loneliness of being awake in a world that rewards distraction. To be intelligent in the deepest sense is not just to possess knowledge. It is to carry the burden of perspective. You see more. You sense undercurrents. You notice inconsistencies in conversations, patterns in people, hypocrisies in systems. You cannot help but think. And often, that thinking leads you somewhere others have not yet been. That's a beautiful gift. But it can be devastating too. Because the further your thoughts stretch beyond the surface, the more effort it takes to return to small talk, to pretend you didn't see what you saw. Eventually, it becomes exhausting, and so you pull away. You shrink from the noise. You crave what the ancient mystics craved: clarity, silence, essence. The philosophical thread, from Socrates to Simone Weil. You're not the first to feel this, and you won't be the last. Socrates wandered Athens asking questions no one wanted to answer. He spoke not to win arguments, but to wake people up. He was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth. But what he really threatened was the comfort of the status quo. Simone Weil, the French philosopher and mystic, starved herself in solidarity with the poor. She wrote of attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity, and she lived in exile, from countries, from institutions, from belonging itself. In every generation there are those who feel too much, think too far, and suffer silently for it. But here's the deeper truth. Their isolation was not empty. It was consecrated by the work they did in it, because it's in solitude that certain truths arrive, the kind that don't show up in meetings or group chats or fast-moving conversations, the kind that come slowly, like ancient light across a vast sky. What we lose when we force connection. Modern culture tends to pathologize solitude. If you're alone, there must be something wrong. If you're not social, you're broken. If you don't enjoy crowds, you're antisocial. If you'd rather read than party, you're labeled boring, distant, too serious. But these labels say more about society than they do about you. We live in a world that values stimulation over reflection, presence over performance, and speed over depth. It teaches people to become visible, even if they are empty, to become successful, even if they are divided inside, to accumulate followers, even if they've never truly been seen. What does that do to the thinker? What does that do to the sensitive? It splits them. They begin to wonder if something is wrong with them. They try to speak in ways that aren't natural, to show up in spaces that deplete them. They push themselves into social structures that don't nourish their soul, and each time they leave feeling more hollow, more invisible, more alone, not because they are incapable of connection, but because they are longing for the real. The real, What thinkers and seekers truly want at the core, intelligent and sensitive people don't reject social life because they're cold. They reject its modern forms because they are too thin. They crave conversations that mean something. They long for connections where nothing needs to be explained. They desire relationships where stillness is allowed, where silence is not feared, where thought is not mocked. What they seek is not popularity, but authenticity. They want the kind of connection that grows slowly, like moss on stone. The kind built on shared values, not shared trends. The kind that makes you feel more like yourself, not less. And the truth is, those relationships exist. They're just harder to find, because they require time, presence, openness. They require you to walk your path alone, long enough that when you finally meet someone walking theirs, you recognize each other, not by surface, but by soul. The invisible work of the solitary mind. Many people underestimate what happens in solitude. They assume nothing is occurring, but inside the mind of a solitary thinker, entire worlds are being built. Ideas are forming, patterns are being recognized, emotions are being metabolized, visions are being refined. This is not absence, it is preparation. The Stoics called it training the inner citadel. The mystics called it polishing the mirror of the heart. Jung called it individuation, the slow, patient unfolding of the true self through integration, not conformity. Solitude, for the wise, is not escape, it is alignment. And when you return from that space, if you return, you do so not as someone who needs validation, but as someone who knows what they carry. A new social life, built on depth, not performance. So perhaps the challenge is not to force yourself into the old model of social life. Perhaps the real invitation is to redefine it. What if your social life wasn't about being seen all the time, but being truly met once in a while? What if connection didn't mean constant updates, but shared stillness? What if your circle wasn't large, but sacred? And what if the way you show up, quiet, thoughtful, reflective, wasn't a liability, but your greatest strength? Because in a world flooded with noise, the quiet ones hold a rare medicine. They remind us how to listen. They teach us how to feel. They model how to stay true to ourselves in a society that constantly tells us not to be. So if you find yourself on the edge of things, feeling like you don't quite fit, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. Let it open you rather than harden you. Let it shape your purpose rather than shrink your self-worth. Because maybe you weren't meant to fit in. Maybe you were meant to stand watch, to see, to sense, to speak only when it's needed. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. There is a price to solitude, even when it is chosen. For those who live primarily in the inner world, the external world can begin to fade into the background, not in theory, but in texture. Relationships become fewer, conversations less frequent, invitations eventually stop arriving. Over time, the silence that once nourished can begin to echo. This is one of the great paradoxes for intelligent, introspective individuals who withdraw from social life. What begins as a choice, a way to protect inner clarity, can slowly become a kind of exile. Not from society alone, but from the very parts of ourselves that are shaped through human interaction: empathy, vulnerability, spontaneity, connection. In modern psychological terms, the long-term consequences of chronic social disconnection are complex. On the one hand, solitude allows for deep focus, creativity, and emotional regulation. But on the other, humans are neurologically wired for connection. Even the most solitary among us carry within a biological and emotional architecture designed for belonging. Psychologist Matthew Lieberman, in his work on social neuroscience, has shown that our brains treat social pain, like exclusion or rejection, similarly to physical pain. The same neural pathways activate. This means that even when someone chooses solitude, they are not immune to its side effects. The mind may understand the value of distance, but the nervous system still longs for resonance, For highly intelligent people, this creates an invisible tension. They know the cost of shallow socialization, but they also feel the ache of prolonged isolation. Some carry this quietly. Others try to fill the gap with work, philosophy, art, and some, over time, begin to doubt their own value, not because they lack it, but because no one reflects it back. There is a psychological term for this: mirror hunger. It describes the human need to be seen accurately by another, not flattered, not idolized, just seen. For those who spend most of their time in solitude, this hunger can go unmet for years. And while they may survive just fine, a part of them slowly hardens, or quietly withers. This loneliness is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle: a lack of shared memories, a birthday no one remembers, the absence of a hand on the shoulder when grief arrives. These are the small devastations that remind us that even the strongest minds carry fragile hearts. Historically, this dynamic has played out in the lives of many thinkers. Nietzsche, whose brilliance reshaped philosophy, died alone and mentally unwell. His writings are laced with both intellectual fire and deep personal sorrow. He spoke of the Übermensch, but he himself struggled to be human among others. Emily Dickinson, who wrote some of the most intimate poetry in American literature, spent decades in self-imposed seclusion. Her letters suggest a sharp mind, a sensitive soul, and a haunting awareness of distance. Even Schopenhauer, whose ideas have shaped this entire discussion, lived a life of contradiction. He craved recognition but pushed people away. He saw human desire as a trap but desired affection himself. His solitude gave him insight, but it also left him bitter. The impact of withdrawing from social life doesn't just affect personal emotions, it shapes identity itself. We build our sense of self partly through reflection in others, through conversation, feedback, conflict, and care. In solitude, the mirror becomes internal. For the introspective, this can be a gift, but without occasional external reflection, self-perception can distort. Confidence can become doubt. Clarity can become rumination. A small failure can feel like a defining flaw. And yet, the world does not make it easy for such people to re-engage. Modern society tends to reward extroversion, the ability to network, to perform, to be available. For the quiet thinker, this environment often feels hostile, or simply tiring. They may try to engage, only to feel unheard, or they may be judged as aloof, arrogant, or strange. This misinterpretation deepens the withdrawal. Why speak if no one is really listening? This is where social projection comes into play. When someone doesn't conform to social norms, others often project onto them. A quiet person is seen as cold. A withdrawn individual is labeled as unfriendly. But these projections say more about the speaker than the subject. Unfortunately, the subject still carries the weight of being misunderstood. Such misunderstanding can have professional consequences too. In workplaces that value charisma over content, those who prefer depth over display may be overlooked. Their ideas may be brilliant, but if they do not know how, or choose not, to package them with charm, they are often ignored. This invisibility breeds quiet resentment, and worse, self-doubt. Relationships can suffer too. Not just romantic, but all forms: family, friendship, community. When you're someone who prefers solitude, others may stop reaching out. Not out of cruelty, but assumption. They assume you don't need them, that you're fine on your own, that you prefer silence. And sometimes you do, but not always. There are moments when the solitude cracks, when you want to be understood, held, heard. But the habit of self-containment is hard to break. Pride gets in the way. Fear, too. What if no one meets you where you are? What if you're too different? And so the cycle continues. Silence leading to distance, distance leading to invisibility, invisibility reinforcing the silence. But there's another side to this story. Many of the most transformative contributions to humanity, scientific, artistic, spiritual, have come from those who walked alone. Their solitude was not always joyful, but it was fertile. From it grew insights that continue to shape us. They carried burdens so others could receive light. This is not to romanticize suffering, but to acknowledge that the very traits that make someone turn away from society, sensitivity, depth, complexity, are often the traits that society later reveres in hindsight. Still, the personal cost is real. Emotional disconnection, missed intimacy, lost moments, a lingering feeling of not quite belonging. So, what can be done? It begins with compassion. For both sides. For those who withdraw, a reminder. It's okay to be seen. You don't have to betray yourself to connect with others. Somewhere, someone can meet you in your silence. You don't have to speak loudly, only honestly. And for those who live more socially, a reminder. Not everyone avoids connection out of pride. Some do it out of protection, or pain, or a need you may not understand. Your warmth may not always be reciprocated, but it may still be needed. In myth, even the hermit eventually returns to the village, not to stay, but to share what they've learned. And the village listens, not because the hermit shouts, but because the silence behind their words carries weight. Intelligence and social withdrawal are not signs of failure, but they are signs of a different rhythm, one that can offer great beauty, but also carries risk. The task is to find a balance, to learn the dance between presence and solitude, between knowing oneself and letting oneself be known, because even the brightest mind still needs a hand to hold. There is a line between solitude and isolation. It is drawn not by how much time you spend alone, but by how alive you feel when you return to yourself. For those who value thought, introspection, and depth, the challenge is not in choosing solitude, but in using it wisely. So how do we turn solitude into strength rather than stagnation? How do we create a life where intelligence does not mean loneliness, where depth does not require disconnection? It begins with rethinking what connection actually is. Most people are taught to associate connection with constant interaction, chats, parties, notifications, shared routines. But for many highly intelligent or sensitive individuals, these forms of connection feel hollow. What they seek is resonance, not just company, a space where their thoughts can stretch, their silences be understood, and their authenticity be met without performance. This is not impossible, but it requires intentional living. 1. Cure it. Don't isolate. Not all social interaction drains you, only the wrong kind. One of the most powerful practices is conscious curation of your social circle. Rather than trying to fit into the crowd, build your own constellation. 1 or 2 people who meet you where you are can offer more nourishment than 100 acquaintances. Start small. Reach out to those who make you feel more like yourself, not less. Reconnect with that one friend you could sit in silence with. Initiate a conversation that feels vulnerable. Make space for rare, soul-filling connection, not constant contact. 2. Practice solitude, not escapism. Solitude becomes a gift when it is chosen with presence, not used to escape discomfort. Create time each day for deliberate solitude. Light a candle. Write in a journal. Meditate. Walk without headphones. Don't use the silence to numb. Use it to listen. This is where practices like journaling and active reflection come in. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding in others and in myself? What thoughts return when the noise disappears? What kind of connection do I truly long for? These questions create space between reaction and awareness. They allow solitude to become a mirror, not a mask. 3. Use psychological tools. Mindfully, modern psychology offers powerful tools for navigating the tension between inner depth and outer engagement. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can help untangle distorted beliefs like, "no one gets me," or "socializing is always draining." These thoughts may feel true, but they're often born from past experiences, not permanent truths. Internal family systems, IFS, can reveal the internal parts of you that fear vulnerability or crave withdrawal. You may find that your social self and solitary self are not enemies, but simply trying to protect you in different ways. Attachment theory reminds us that early emotional experiences shape how we relate to others. If you've experienced inconsistent care or emotional dismissal, you may unconsciously believe connection equals risk. Naming this pattern can help soften its grip. Therapy, even briefly, can act as a retraining ground, a place to practice being seen without performance. 4. Embrace traditional wisdom. Much of what modern science now validates was known to ancient traditions. Drawing from those can offer both grounding and transcendence. Stoicism teaches us that peace comes from aligning with nature and accepting what we cannot control, including the misunderstandings of others. A Stoic does not need constant approval. They tend their inner garden. Sufism encourages the cultivation of the heart's truth. The poet Rumi, a spiritual mystic, often spoke of the soul's longing for union, not just with others, but with the divine. His solitude was never empty. It was filled with listening. Buddhism offers tools like meditation and mindfulness, not as a retreat from the world, but as a deep engagement with it. Through presence, even brief encounters become meaningful. By blending these traditional frameworks with modern tools, we form a bridge between the old wisdom of the seeker and the new language of the self-aware. 5. Redefine contribution. Many intelligent individuals feel disengaged from society not because they don't care, but because they don't see how they fit. Their ideas don't align with trends. Their pace is different, but contribution does not require conformity. Ask yourself, what truth have I discovered in my solitude that the world may need? How can I offer it in a form that honors my energy? It might be a poem, a thoughtful conversation, a podcast, a handwritten letter, a quiet act of kindness. These are not small things. They are the soul's way of re-entering the world on its own terms. 6. Make peace with misunderstanding. No matter how well you explain yourself, some people will never understand why you withdraw, or why you think the way you do, or why you prefer silence over small talk. Let them misunderstand. Your life is not a thesis to be defended. It's a path to be walked, and some of the most important steps will be taken alone. The goal is not to be understood by everyone, but to be true to yourself in a way that invites real understanding when it comes. 7. Find the micro-communities. The modern world can feel vast, loud, and disjointed, but within it are hidden micro-communities, spaces where people value depth, reflection, curiosity. You are not the only one seeking something real. The key is to find where those seekers gather. Online forums, philosophy discussion groups, book clubs, intentional living communities. These are the new agora, the modern-day equivalents of Plato's Academy or Sufi circles. You don't have to speak often, but knowing such spaces exist can be a balm. 8. Design a rhythm. Balance is not about symmetry. It's about rhythm. Some weeks you'll need more silence. Others you'll feel an unexpected pull toward connection. Honor that rhythm. Design a life that includes space for both. You might create a weekly ritual. One day for social engagement, another for inward reflection. This structure offers freedom. It protects both your solitude and your ability to reconnect. In the end, this isn't about fixing something broken. It's about living more consciously within your nature. If you are someone who feels too deep for shallow waters, too thoughtful for the speed of daily life, you are not flawed. You are simply living in a world that rarely makes room for quiet minds. But your path is needed. Your rhythm has value. You don't have to talk all the time to be heard. You don't have to be seen by many to be seen truly. You don't have to change your nature to find your place. You are already the place. Others just haven't found their way to you yet. Let your solitude teach you, but don't let it trap you. Let it make you softer, not harder. And when you return to the world, do so not out of obligation, but out of quiet power. Some people are born with a sensitivity to the undercurrents of life. They feel the weight of things others brush off. They carry questions longer. They listen for what is not said. For these people, often the thinkers, the observers, the creatives, solitude is not just a preference, it is a sanctuary. But even sanctuaries can become prisons. This exploration began with Schopenhauer, a man whose vision of humanity was both piercing and painful. He saw through the illusions of society, but in doing so, he also cut himself off from many of its joys. He valued truth above comfort, independence above belonging. And in that fierce devotion to the intellect, he gave language to a type of alienation that many still quietly live. His life reminds us of the dual-edged nature of intelligence and solitude. That the mind, when left unbalanced, can turn in on itself. That brilliance is not always a light. It can also be a fire that burns unseen. But Schopenhauer was not alone. Throughout history, others have carried this paradox. Philosophers, poets, scientists, monks, mystics, they stepped away from the noise not to escape life, but to see it more clearly. And in that clarity, they often found a kind of pain, the realization that deep thought does not always lead to deep connection. Yet they also left something behind: words, art, discoveries, stories that connect us across time. Proof that solitude, when used with love, does not isolate. It expands. In our modern age, the tension between solitude and social life feels more pronounced than ever. We're surrounded by tools that promise connection, yet many feel lonelier than before. The intelligent and introspective often retreat, not out of disdain, but because the pace, surface-level interaction, and overstimulation of modern life leave them feeling more disconnected, not less. And so they walk alone, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. But here's what we must remember. Solitude is a place, not a sentence. It is where we gather the pieces of ourselves, not where we disappear. And just as the seasons shift, so too must our inner lives. There's a time for stepping back, but also a time for reaching out. A time to listen deeply, but also to speak, even if the voice trembles. Intelligent people may care less about social life, but not because they are cold or unfeeling. Often it is the opposite. They care too much. They see too much. And that intensity creates a kind of fatigue, even a kind of grief, because they long for something richer than what society often offers. But the answer is not to give up on connection. It is to redefine it. Connection that honors depth. That makes room for silence. That allows for disagreement without disconnection. That understands solitude not as rejection, but as respect, for oneself and for others. And we, those who walk this path, must remember, we are not alone in being alone. There are others, scattered across time and space, who feel what we feel, who wonder, question, ache, and reach inward. They may not always be near in body, but they exist. And sometimes all it takes is a line of poetry, a shared glance, a thoughtful message to remind us that we are part of something bigger. A quiet lineage, a hidden brotherhood, a sisterhood of seekers. Let the solitude teach you. Let it shape your gifts. But do not let it steal your joy. Because even the deepest minds need light. Even the most thoughtful hearts deserve laughter. Even the most independent souls long to be held. So, walk alone when you must. But do not forget, you are still allowed to be known. Even in your silence, you matter. Even in your stillness, you are moving. Even in your solitude you belong. If you've made it this far, take a breath. Let the silence settle for a moment. You're not here by accident. Something in this conversation about solitude, intelligence, disconnection, and depth resonated. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet distance between yourself and the world, that ache to be understood without having to explain, that pull towards something deeper, slower, more real. This space exists for people like you, people who don't just want information. They want insight, not just noise, but meaning, not just motivation, but transformation. Here we blend the wisdom of ancient philosophy with the clarity of modern psychology. We reflect on what it means to be fully human, thoughtful, vulnerable, powerful, and we do it without shame, without fluff, and without pretending that life is simple. Because it isn't. But it can be beautiful. You don't have to walk this path alone. Together, we explore the inner terrain, our fears, our gifts, our shadows. We examine how power really works, not just in the world, but inside ourselves. We reflect on how to lead with integrity, how to set boundaries with grace, how to listen deeply to who we are becoming, and we do it without rushing, without performance, without perfection. So if you're looking for a place where you can grow with intention, where ideas matter, where self-awareness is sacred, and where emotional intelligence is part of the journey, subscribe. Join us, not just to watch, but to walk beside others on this same path, because the world needs more thinkers who feel, more seekers who reflect, more people who know their power doesn't come from dominating others, but from knowing themselves. This is your invitation to keep going, to go deeper, to remember that you are not strange for feeling different. You are awake, and this is just the beginning.